and welcome to this edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Brittany Ramsey. As wildfires continue to burn across the Northwest, Premier Doug Ford paid a visit to Thunder Bay Wednesday. He met with evacuees from Deer Lake First Nation as well as emergency management officials. But despite continued calls from Anishinaabe Nation for a state of emergency declaration, the Premier continues to insist that's not necessary. Ryan Benazzo has more.
Premier Doug Ford says he felt it was important for him to personally check in with some of the 680 evacuees staying in Thunder Bay. He did that on Wednesday morning.
They were quite happy how they're being treated, and that's why I'm here. I want to hear firsthand from the people to make sure they're being taken care of.
But if they were hoping to hear the Premier change course and declare a province-wide state of emergency, that didn't happen. Ford continues to insist that an emergency order for northwestern Ontario, which allows the government to clear roads and property to facilitate additional evacuations, is enough.
It's not holding back any resources. We will put all the resources we have. I won't spare a penny. We'll make sure we're there to support the people of northwestern Ontario.
But Anishinaabe Nation Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler isn't satisfied.
I think we've been very clear.
NAN has been pushing the province for more than 2 weeks to declare a state of emergency, saying it will allow the government to dedicate more resources to ensure evacuees aren't just shipped to other municipalities, but properly supported once they're there. Nearly 3,200 people from 5 communities have been evacuated so far, but NAN believes that number could balloon to 6,000 if the weather doesn't start to cooperate.
When you're dealing with an emergency of this scale, it needs to be all hands on deck, that it has to be everyone coming on board and working from the same page. That we cannot just fight amongst ourselves in terms of what constitutes an emergency.
Indigenous Affairs Minister Greg Rickford acknowledges the challenges of finding adequate space here in the Northwest.
There are capacity limits to certain towns and cities across because the evacuees may put pressures on some of the health and social services of those communities. But so far, overall, given the magnitude and scope of this evacuation, we believe it has gone well.
Ford adds there's also plenty of room in the GTA if evacuees are willing to travel that far. But the Independent First Nations Alliance wants senior levels of government to establish a large evacuation center here in the Northwest.
We need to have First Nations, take care of First Nations.
NAN has developed its own emergency response plan, which was presented to the Premier during his visit. It calls for, among other things, a tripartite agreement between the federal and provincial governments and First Nations that establishes clear roles and responsibilities in the event of an emergency.
I'll be running through that and implementing as much as we can. But I appreciate them doing that.
Ryan Benazzo, TBT News.
It's well coordinated.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh kept the focus fully on Indigenous issues when he visited northwestern Ontario on Monday and Tuesday. It was part of a week-long tour by Singh, who finished a stop in Thunder Bay by meeting with evacuees from the region's wildfires. Catalina Gillies has more.
But I just wanted to check in on you, see how you're doing. I know that this has been a really difficult time.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh shared a message of hope in an otherwise dark time for several Northern Ontario community members. Due to the dangerous wildfires that have been ongoing for over a month, hundreds of First Nation members have had to flee to Thunder Bay. Singh took his time to meet with the evacuees, as well as healthcare workers from the region and firefighters working to combat the blazes.
It's hard to imagine being away from home for so many weeks, in a brand new place that you're not familiar with. But despite that, when I was going from table to table, meeting with community, they were so positive in their spirits and so resilient. So I wanted just to acknowledge that. I wanted people to feel just that appreciation for that recognition of their resilience.
Singh believes there is a real threat to Indigenous communities with the climate crisis and that they often experience the changes before anyone else. He says not only are they directly impacted by the fires, the warmer weather shortens the season for ice roads that First Nations rely on for transportation. Singh says he is committed to protecting the planet and the homes of these remote communities.
Making sure we commit to reducing our emissions, making sure we help communities be more resilient in the face of these climate fires, so investments to help them be proactive, not respond to a crisis, but be proactive before the crisis happens, so there's investments in place and communities are safer. We need to take on the climate crisis with the urgency that the situation deserves.
Jagmeet Singh will continue his week-long tour of Indigenous communities with stops in Burnaby, Merritt, Penticton, and Kamloops. His goal is to listen to more Indigenous voices and fight for equality and reconciliation. Catalina Gillies, TBT News.
Meanwhile, Singh is applauding a move by the federal government to provide more support for the Grassy Narrows First Nation. On Monday, Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller signed an agreement with Grassy Narrows to provide $68.9 million for a Mercury care home. The funds will be used for the long-term costs of providing care and services at the facility. The care home will have inpatient capacity for 22 community members suffering from mercury poisoning, as well as outpatient services. The funding will be provided as a lump sum, which Grassy Narrows can put in a trust to ensure that it's secure. Singh says this move is small, but a positive step forward to address what Indigenous communities have been asking for.
This is another injustice that's gone on for decades. Grassy Narrows, a community surrounded by water, where the water is literally poisoning the people, is something that was dumping, and various other companies made this happen. It was not the Indigenous communities that made any sort of wrong decision. This was directly caused to them by logging companies and by mills and by dumping of mercury.
Preparations for the care home have already begun, with construction starting next spring. The facility is scheduled to open in 2023. Dryden City Council voted Monday night to disband its local police service and have the OPP take over policing duties in the city. That decision leaves the Thunder Bay Police Service as the lone remaining municipally operated police force in northwestern Ontario. Adam Riley has details.
In a complete turnaround from 2019 and a move dubbed as anticlimactic by Mayor Greg Wilson, Dryden City Council has voted 6-1 in favor of disbanding the Dryden Police Service and adopting the Ontario Provincial Police. The lone dissenting voice came from former City Police Chief, now Councillor Shane McKinnon. In his comments prior to the vote, McKinnon asked if there had been any information being withheld from Council.
I'm not looking for details, but in general terms, are there issues with the Dryden Police Services Board, the administration of the board, the staffing, liability issues, financial issues?
However, Costing Committee members CAO Roger Nesbitt and Councillor Norm Bush stated they were unaware of any information being withheld. McKinnon also questioned many aspects of the costing, including limited access for public meetings and the city's current debt. In his remarks, Bush spoke about how policing in Dryden was inherently expensive, calling it undeniable that Dryden has the highest policing costs per capita.
Dryden's cost per property is $1,040 per property. The average of the 5 benchmark communities that are supported by the OPP is $583 per property.
Other councillors brought up similar points associated with finances, and one by one, each councillor announced their intentions on how they planned on voting.
We have a wonderful police force, but we've reached a point where we cannot provide them with the resources that they need.
To know your community as the highest crime rate in the province, the lowest rate of crime solved, the highest cost per household is of grave concern to me.
When asked on how the city will pay for the switch, Mayor Wilson says several options are on the table.
Drawing down reserves, possibly increase taxes, possibly cut services. I don't think so, but that's really not for me to say. That's for council discussion and a lot of discussion over the next while.
Now, how the city will go about the transfer and how long that will take is something that has yet to be decided by the city's administration. However, Wilson notes the first step will involve informing Ontario's Solicitor General about the city's intention to adopt the OPP. Adam Riley, TBT News.
Meanwhile, the dust is still settling on Monday's decision to accept the costing proposal from the OPP, but the result doesn't come as a surprise to Dryden's top cop. Police Chief Doug Paulson says DPS had been very involved in the costing process over the last 9 months, providing information and updates to the costing committee and council. But in the weeks leading up to the vote, members of the police service had a feeling how the vote would go. Despite that premonition, Paulson knows it'll take some time for officers and staff to ultimately digest this outcome of the vote.
the biggest thing is making sure there's clear and accurate information is provided to the members. Again, like I said, in this process especially, the way it was rolling out, the final decision was not totally unexpected. So members were somewhat aware, so it was not like a big shock or anything like that.
Paulson wants to remind residents that DPS is still in the community and will continue to provide service, which will help with the transition process. A long-awaited project is wrapping up on Nipigon's waterfront. Work got underway earlier this week, rebuilding the breakwater that protects the community marina. It's a project that's expected to have benefits not only for boaters, but for property owners along the shoreline. Alex Flood has details.
Thompson Contracting and other local firms have begun laying down rocks along Nipigon's waterfront to rebuild their breakwater. It's hoped the effort will provide improved shelter for boats docking in the harbor and greater protection for structures on the shoreline. Mayor Richard Harvey says it's a relief to finally see the project underway.
We're so fortunate to have this asset here in town and to be able to have that. And I know for a lot of people from Thunder Bay, they don't get down here. And, just always want to encourage people from the region to come down to check out the marina. And all of this is part of that bigger project of just enhancing that visitor experience to our community, where we've got probably one of the best protected marinas and harbors on the North Shore Lake Superior. So it really is a place that has something for everyone.
The community had a breakwater system installed several years ago, but it was partially removed to allow more water flow in an effort to restore fish habitat. Ultimately, the habitat was unaffected, and a number of other issues surfaced, including a stronger current in the summer and heavier ice buildup in the winter. Harvey says the decision to rebuild the breakwater was an easy choice to make.
So this is a decision that we've been looking at for a number of years, and the town finally decided that we had discussions with various ministries about who might put it back in or whether it could be done. And so we made the decision to put it back in, but we want to make sure it's safe. We want to make sure that we have people aren't coming in with unknown currents taking place in that. So that's a really important thing to the town, and we've made that decision to move ahead with this.
Construction of the breakwater on Nipigon River should wrap up by the end of the weekend, on budget and on time. This is fantastic news for residents and tourists, as their public amenities and their beaches will receive the protection they deserve. Alex Flood, TBT News.
And coming up after the break, the province activates emergency funding for farmers in the Rainy River District. Forest fires have hit the Northwest region hard this year, and the Kenora-Rainy River District is facing a major drought. On Tuesday, the province announced some emergency funding for farmers in that area. At a press conference near Emo, Kenora-Rainy River MPP Greg Rickford was joined by area farmers as well as Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs Lisa Thompson to announce $2 million in emergency support for livestock farmers. Since early May, rainfall in the district has been very minimal, which has caused farmers to begin selling off their livestock much sooner than what would be profitable. $800,000 of the funding is going to the beet farmers of Ontario to secure feed for cattle, as the lack of rain has depleted the amount of hay that's being produced.
It's going to buy us some time because we're not done. This is absolutely a great announcement. We're happy that this feed, this $800,000 that's being directed to the BFO to secure feed and get it in the district. We need that immediately to keep the cattle that are here, and we'll have some time to do some more negotiating going forward.
Bliss says the fields have been so overgrazed that it will take years to recover. The rest of the funding is allotted to source water or install new fencing in alternative grazing sites. Applications are required from farmers to access that money. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization has reopened its Ignace Learn More Center. After being closed for several months due to the pandemic, the newly renovated center is designed to educate the public about Canada's plan to store used nuclear fuel. Ignace is among the final candidates to host that site. Alex Flood reports.
Since opening in 2016, the Ignace Learn More Center has been an important source of information for the Northwest region on the proposed plan to store used nuclear fuel near that community. Area residents this past week had the chance to reconnect with and talk to NWMO staff about their thoughts on hosting the project. The reopening began with a ceremonial smudge by members of Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation, a reserve nearby the proposed repository site. Vince Ponca is the regional communications manager for the NWMO, and Ponca says receiving approval from both Ignace residents and Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation is the organization's top priority.
That's an essential part of what we do is Ignace and Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation are considered host communities, so it's essential that we do have willing and informed hosts. So speaking with both those communities is essential to all of our work. Are always working with Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation to make sure they have the information they need to make an informed decision.
Included in the reopening event was the NWMO Mobile Learn More Center tour, which has traveled nearly 1,500 kilometers since July 5th, informing 10 communities across the Northwest about the proposal. Ignace has been under consideration for the repository since 2010, with a final decision expected sometime in 2023. Mayor Penny Lucas says she appreciates the ample amount of time Ignace has been given to satisfy local safety concerns.
It's not a project that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. So we have lots of time to put together whatever it is we need to do to make sure that this is going to be a good experience for Ignace and a positive experience for the people of the community.
The proposed $24 billion facility is predicted to have a life expectancy of 150 years and could have an incredible impact on the financial future of Ignace and that area of the Northwest. South Bruce in Southern Ontario is the only other remaining site involved in the selection process. Alex Flood, TBT News.
The threat of forest fire evacuations is common for the Red Lake area, and that has many wondering if a second roadway into the region is needed. Last summer, Highway 105 was near gridlock as residents fled their homes from the Red Lake 49 fire. At the time, MP Eric Malello said a lack of infrastructure was something that needed to be addressed. Red Lake Mayor Fred Moda says discussions have taken place with the ministry regarding alternate directions, but a shakeup in the provincial cabinet means they need to actually restart discussions with a newly appointed minister.
Minister Yakubuski has moved on to a different portfolio within the province, so now we'll be having some dialogue with Minister Rickford about that. But there are bush roads up this way that lead through the Kenora area, and some that come through the western part of our municipality, and also some a little further to the south.
And Moda says discussions also included more fire breaks in the area. That would provide more time for an evacuation or prevent one altogether. And coming up next, the 2021 Coney Island Music Festival brings hundreds out to Lake of the Woods. It was sunny skies and good vibes in Kenora this week for a music festival, one that's entertained audiences on Coney Island for over a decade. In its 13th year, the festival was seen as a restart to a pre-pandemic social event. Adam Riley has details.
Music returned once again to the shores of Coney Island on Lake of the Woods for the 13th, maybe annual Coney Island Music Festival this past week, which featured local and regional acts. Organizer Ferg Devon says after pivoting how the event was delivered last year amid the initial waves of COVID-19, that it was great to be back for 2021.
Last year we had to stage on a dock and we only broadcast to the water. So for the city to say to us, you know, we're into step 3, everything's improving so much, it's time to get back to normal.
And back to normal it was, with over 1,000 people boating out to the island over the course of the day. A bit of an inside joke, the maybe annual part of the festival's name comes as a result of the fact that without volunteers, donations, or sponsors, the Coney Island Music Festival wouldn't happen. Devon says it takes approximately $1,000 each year to run the one-day festival.
People can make donations. We do a rake of the field, so to speak, where we ask people to make a donation, and we've got some raffle draws that we do. And we're very fortunate in that the Standard Insurance and Wawanesa have been presenting sponsors for a number of years, and the Kenora and Lake of the Woods Regional Community Foundation have also been on board.
But it wasn't just organizers who were thrilled with the day's events. Attendees were also happy to take in the sounds of the festival, especially after the hardships and stressors of 2020.
It feels like back to normal. I don't know about you, but I love seeing everyone around. I love hearing the live music. It's like we're waking up again.
Yeah, it feels normal. It's great to be seeing everyone enjoying themselves and back together.
and not scared to be around each other. It's so much fun being back here.
I didn't know what I was expecting. I came for a nice paddle, and it seems it brought people in from all around. I think people are happy to be back together and see each other again. It's an awesome experience. Music is great. People are great.
Closing out the festival was Thunder Bay's own Honest Heart Collective, performing in their first live show since before the pandemic. Adam Riley, TBT News.
Residents in Sioux Lookout have until Monday to provide their input on a proposed park to be built in the Hudson area. The proposal comes from Council, a strategic plan geared towards community development and planning in the municipality. The hope is to spur both interest and development in Hudson, which sits along the shore of Lost Lake. The project is still in its early stages, but Manager of Corporate Services and Municipal Clerk Brian McKinnon says they already have an idea of what they want to do with the land.
The area provides a really natural look-off for Lac Seul, and so it's above sort of where the houseboat companies are located and above the CN rail lines. And so the area itself we're anticipating would have a pavilion which would house photos of the history of Hudson, as well as a couple of play areas for children, benches for people to be able to enjoy the view.
McKinnon says once the final design is presented, the hope is to have the project get underway by next building season. Well, that's all for this edition of Northwest Newsweek. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.